This might sound dumb. I was going to believe this one. But I mean, I had been thinking of this, so I figured I would ask somebody else.
Yeah.
If Earth was a body and mankind was an organ, what organ would we be?
This is so interesting, actually. What organ would we be? That's a really good question.
You can take time to think.
Yeah.
The least like glorified way possible. I think maybe the brain.
I don't know if it's like a specific organ, but I kind of think we would be like the digestive system in a way.
I guess the brain.
Humans are the brain in the way that humans are like, we're the ones asking these questions. We're the ones trying to make sense of the world in this way and understand our place in it and reflect on what we're doing. And I think that kind of like maybe the forebrain specifically of the body.
Like, I want to say the heart in like the emotional sense, even though that's not what the heart does.
Planktonic photosynthesizers account for at least half of the oxygen that we breathe. So if the ocean becomes a less survivable place, we have a lot to lose out from that. It's kind of like the ocean is like our mother that we're dependent on but no longer live with, and we're sitting here thinking that we can make it just fine if she croaks, you know, but in reality she's the one paying for our apartment and our food and our gas and stuff like that.
I'd like to read a quote by Ernest Hemingway. He always thought of the sea as la mar, which is what people call her in Spanish when they love her. Sometimes those who love her say bad things of her, but they are always said as though she were a woman. Some of the younger fishermen, those who used buoys as floats for their lines and had motorboats bought when the shark livers had brought much money, spoke of her as Elmar, which is masculine. They spoke of her as a contestant, or a place, or even an enemy. But the old man always thought of her as feminine, as something that gave or withheld great favors, and if she did wild or wicked things, it was because she could not help them. The moon affects her as it does a woman, he thought. He's right, the moon affects me. I'm a Leo. Okay. So, on a serious note, it would seem that for the majority of human history, even far before Mr. Hemingway, humans have had this inherent curiosity and fascination with the ocean, almost as if it has its own kind of gravity. I guess like the moon. In modern times, people vacation to the coast or go on cruises. Hundreds of years before that, there were voyagers who, in pursuit of greater things, believed the ocean might be the place to look. Seems like ever since we grew legs and learned to walk away from the ocean, we've been trying to build fins to swim back.
So I love the ocean and the beach. I am from Bucks County, so I live pretty close to New Jersey, so I grew up just like doing day trips to the beach a lot. And then also my high school occasionally would do, even though we were an hour away, we would go to the beach to do like cleanups for like service hours. So I also have some kind of experience doing that, and it was always really fun to like have an excuse to go to the beach in the winter and like clean up trash and stuff. So it's definitely something that's important to me.
It's just so vast. It's like hard to comprehend how much there is to it, and it's so important to us that it just matters a lot to me. I want to get there as fast as possible.
Part of our obsession from the ocean might come from her mystery. Only about 5% of the ocean is actually explored, and it seems to be a wonderful 5%, home to living dreams and nightmares that exceed the creative capacities of people. However, another part of the ocean's mystery can be attributed to her sheer and intimidating size.
And I think that's part of the reason that, despite our love and dependence on her, we also underestimate her vulnerability.
We talk a lot about ocean pollution and the climate crisis, and most sensible people know that it's not looking good. But we're stuck in this double think state. We rarely feel incentivized enough to enact real change in our lives because we feel too small and powerless to do anything substantial, like cells in a body. But I think it's worth a reminder that it only takes 1 or 2 cells to start multiplying to make a tumor. And cancer can kill a body. Cancer can kill a body fast. So who's to say if we're small like cells, we don't also have the power to work together in an immune-like system to save a body too? That's why for a project/experiment/satisfaction of curiosity, I decided to talk to some other sound-minded cells in the body to discuss her condition and decide whether she's worth the cost of life support or if we should just let the cancer run wild and see what happens.
I would feel so sad and I think kind of defeated.
Heartbroken, maybe devastated.
I would be really upset, I think.
I mean, sad seems like pretty reductive, but of course, like, I think, you know, somewhere between sad and heartbroken to think that the changes that we're making in these ecosystems are making them different than they were when I was a child. From a scientist's perspective, absolutely, like, without the oceans, our planet would be screwed. Absolutely screwed. Like, they drive the water cycle and the energy cycles and kind of all of the systems and services that nature provides that we depend on.
When people say ocean pollution, plastic is usually the first to come to mind because it's typically the most visible and jarring. Other types of pollution include noise pollution, chemical pollution, oil pollution, light pollution, mining disturbances, sewage and eutrophication, acidification, and toxic leaching from disposed World War II ammunitions. The ocean takes a lot of crap from us, and she's being a good sport about it. Obviously, it's beautiful. However, it's going to start to bite us in the ass if we don't shape up soon. And when I say bite, it's not going to be in the form of teeth, which would be much more forgiving. But rather, it would be in the form of collapsing economies, unreliable food supply, poor air quality, and serious illness and disease. So if images of a fluid dump and smells of rotting fish don't pull at the right heartstrings, you can be sure there are many other things that you should be aware and scared about.
I would not necessarily argue that they're more important or more worth preserving than any other ecosystems, but we depend on aquatic ecosystems for a lot of things. We depend on them for sources of food, obviously for our sources of water, for carrying away our waste in a lot of cases and kind of taking, you know, we process a lot of it first, but it is carried away by these systems, as well as all kinds of things like our agriculture depends on these systems. So we get fish from them directly, but our, you know, everything we eat depends on our aquatic ecosystems in some way. And so, like, keeping them functioning keeps those services for being provided by nature for us.
And we should care because this is a global system. Nothing will happen in one spot and in one place only. We can see that with carbon emissions. Like, the global north is most responsible for historical carbon emissions, but we can see that their impacts are like weighing the heaviest on the global south. But it is happening in our own country, and you can see that with coastal erosion, wildfires, these intense weather events, hurricanes, tornadoes. We're getting earthquakes in areas we've never had earthquakes before, drought, flooding, like all of these things. And these are only getting more and more intense.
Recently released Climate Change and Epidemics report has revealed an accelerating global health crisis directly linked to climate change.
In fact, the increasing frequency and strength of storms like Milton and Helene may have some rethinking where they choose to live. In many areas, many wants to be
But then you also have, so that's natural fluctuations. On top of that, though, we have fossil fuel emission-driven climate change, which is measurably heating the atmosphere and the oceans. And so that is this extra push from behind. And so what we're seeing now is, record temperatures. It's certainly warmer than normal in the Northeast.
The more we get them as human beings, is that how you linked it?
Ocean eutrophication, acidification, and rising temperatures cause dead zones, coral bleaching, and lower yields for fishermen. Which, boo-hoo, some fish die. You're still gonna go on that cruise or buy that plastic bottle. We've heard these terms so much, but these ugly problems are hidden beneath the sparkling surface, so we're just kind of numb to them. As the saying goes, there's plenty of fish in the sea. Well, what happens when there's none?
Plastic is degradable, but it's not biodegradable. So it is breaking into many, many little pieces, which is actually, I'm not sure if you've heard about the garbage patch, probably, yeah, but that's actually one of the big issues with the concept of cleaning it up or having people visualize it, is that there's not a whole lot of like full chunks of like water bottles or whatever. They get broken down into tiny little pieces and they sink below the surface and can even reach as far as like deep sea corals, as far as like the abyssal plain. They do leach a lot of the chemicals that were used to make them, which they're things that do have effects on like reproductive health and things that can cause many different organ diseases and are carcinogens, cause neurological issues as well. And that's not just true for us, that's true for a lot of biologicals.
One reason people are starting to care about it is their health. Like, I think as with anything, a lot of people don't care about something until it affects them directly, which isn't the best, but I think sometimes we can use that to our advantage.
I'll make some distinction between macroplastics and microplastics. So macroplastics are, we define it just based on the size, like any plastic that is bigger than 5 millimeters on a side, so that's bigger than about a pencil eraser. And so this is things like plastic bags and, the mouthpieces of vapes and all this kind of stuff that we find out in our streams and in the environment. And this has direct impacts on wildlife, especially in aquatic environments, in the ocean and streams. They're wildlife is more likely, or they're likely to mistake these items for food, and so they ingest them, and that means they're eating less of the food that actually sustains them. And so we've probably all seen pictures of like albatross with guts full of plastic and stuff like that. And these macroplastics can also be leaching toxins, so they're not only like interfering with digestion because of being big chunks of plastic, but they can also be directly toxic to wildlife that we care about. And they can be, there's some research that has shown that these plastics can be surfaces that harmful microbes can use to reproduce on, so we might be, directly affecting our health. The other thing that happens with these macroplastics is that by kind of the action of UV light and kind of physical abrasion and breaking down, they turn into microplastics, which we're all very concerned about. They have lots of health impacts that we've learned about, but lots that we still don't know. And we know that they cross the blood-brain barrier. They're found everywhere in our bodies and stuff. So there's a lot of things to be concerned about with all of these microplastics.
I don't have the numbers in front of me. I would imagine that overall the incidence of many different types of cancer have increased over the years. I mean, for instance, like there's a higher incidence of pancreatic cancer, higher incidence of gastric cancer. What the cause of those cancers is probably multifactorial, probably environmental, impacting the DNA and passing on then, to cause there to be problems with like tumor suppressor genes and leading to more incidence of cancer. But I don't know, also that we have better screening tests to detect cancer. So it's possible that because of the better screening tests, we're just seeing more cancers than we had 50 years ago and earlier. They didn't have a lot of the tests that we have today to determine if someone has these cancers. They didn't have the high level of testing that we have now. I think most people have some level of empathy, and I think most people care if other people get sick. Sometimes people may care because it's someone they love, or they may care just because they're a very empathetic person and they genuinely feel bad if someone is sick or ill or injured. And then I think other people care more for selfish reasons. They think if that person's sick, then potentially I could get sick.
So this summer I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is a type of inflammatory bowel disease.
So yes, my mom is right that a few people do genuinely care that when you're sick. However, as somebody who's been recently diagnosed with a disease, what I've found is that they'll only really care for a short amount of time. They'll only really think about it for a short amount of time until something more prevalent to them happens and your condition recedes to their subconscious. Everyone's lives are riddled with their own little problems, and it's enough to worry about your own without worrying about somebody else's. And this way of thinking is totally human. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. We're all very empathetic creatures, but we're also incredibly busy creatures. And I think this way of thinking can be expanded to our treatment of the climate crisis. Yes, a lot of people think it's really scary, but often we have to deal with our own lives. We have to make phone calls and answer emails and find food to eat and take care of people. So until we hear another bad statistic or see a scary video in the news, we don't really think about it all the time. And this on and off way of thinking isn't really effective if we want to enact like a significant amount of change. I mean, I think recently a group of scientists found bits of microplastic in dolphin breath. And that's really scary, but people aren't going to go around thinking about dolphin breath, and that's normal. If we really want to make the change, unfortunately, we probably won't reach this kind of necessary level of consistent worry until something significant happens. And regarding the climate crisis, we have kind of reached that point of no return. I don't think a lot of people really appreciate that, and the only thing we can really do right now is slow it down, which is still better than not doing anything. But I think that just goes to show, until we get sick, either as individuals or as a species or as a planet, we're really not going to care, and we have to live with the symptoms every single day. And I can tell you, being sick is not a good way to live.
And I'm bringing this up for a reason, because although there isn't a verified link between IBD and plastic consumption, microplastics have been proven to exacerbate the development and symptoms of the disease. People with IBD have higher levels of plastic in their intestines as opposed to healthy people. So like Barbie doll guts. The most common type of plastic found in the Barbie doll guts is polyethylene terephthalate. Polyethylene terephthalate also happens to be the most common type of plastic used to make water bottles and clothing. That should be why you care.
Now, obviously, not everyone's body would and is reacting to the plastic the same way mine did. And I'm not saying that it's the cause of all IBD cases. However, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease rates have been steadily increasing since the 1990s. Most cases are in the United States, China, and Western Europe. So obviously there must be some link to the lifestyle, such as the fast fashion industry and consumption of overly processed foods, all things containing bits of polyethylene terephthalate. And not only that, but the age of people diagnosed with the disease has been getting lower and lower.
Usually there's surfers out there, but as you can imagine, they've all frozen and sunk to the bottom.
Environmental justice is really centered around understanding like who faces the hardest and most intense impacts of climate change and of environmental degradation. Historically, those communities have been minority communities, low-income communities, the global south in general. And that's because they have specifically been targeted based on systemic racism, that they don't have the resources or the political power to stand up for themselves or to say no to certain things. The parties most responsible are the global north. These are countries that have money and power and have profited off of colonialism and exploitation of resources.
Well, the biggest culprit, corporations. People who have a lot of money in this.
Because I wouldn't blame individual people for like throwing away their plastic items and it ends up in the ocean. I think we're kind of in a place where we're kind of stuck using a lot of plastic unless you really make a really strong effort to not do so. So I think that's definitely part of it, and the companies that are continuing to push that production and then the selling it onto us as well.
It's like they're on the very top of the building, that they are actively burning to the ground, and they think that they're not going to be affected by it, that they're going to die before the fire actually reaches them. So they keep on kind of selling the world in a way.
Yes, I could preach to why the global north should stop buying so much plastic because it affects the global south in numerous unjust ways, but that wouldn't scare the global north into changing. And since we're the problem, we're the ones who need to be scared. And this is scary. When you throw plastics away, they don't go away. Some plastics are made on a molecular level so that they're at the end of their life. They can't decompose. They just get smaller and smaller and smaller and spread until they cover every inch of the earth. And they will be here forever, long after the earth and all of us are gone. I know sometimes here in the US we make ourselves feel important and safe by thinking we're separate from the rest of the world and its ugly problems. We have this self-important view of ourselves sitting in this sterile plastic tower high above the rest of the world, when in reality we're all at the same ocean level when the sea levels rise. We're all breathing the same air. We all get the same sunlight and toxic UV rays. So, when a strong enough wind rips through the forest and tears all the trees down, our tower's gonna fall too.
On our own, what we can do is educate ourselves. Like you were saying, you looked into the effects of, microplastics on being vegetarian or just eating, not eating meat, but eating other things. And I think, being curious and asking questions is important, because it's really easy to feel apathetic because the issues are so big, or to feel like you just don't even want to look into it because you don't even want to know what's going on. And I think there's probably a lot of work to be done to get communities who don't live directly next to the ocean, but maybe near other waterways, to just understand how all water pollution is connected. Like I was saying, care about things when it affects them, but if we could figure out a way to make people care about people that they'll never meet in a place they'll never go to.
Right now, we have a project in my lab, so you probably know about the different single-use plastic bans that are going on around southeastern Pennsylvania. These kinds of single-use plastic bans are one of the policy tools that we have to address plastic waste in the environment right now. In some states, some of our neighboring states like New York and New Jersey, have these statewide bans. And so our lab we're kind of right at the tail end of sample collection, looking at how effective these bans are at keeping plastic out of the environment, and specifically out of the streams and stream banks. And this is directly affecting the ocean because 80% of the plastic in the ocean actually comes from land, from kind of the land that feeds into streams and from beaches directly adjacent to the ocean. Yeah, so this is kind of this is all the stuff that's yet to be processed, and then everything that's laid out in tape is waiting for us to measure it and record the information from it. So we bring it all. So we come back from label with where we collected it and the date and the time and who was there. And then oh my gosh, so much glass. We collect all of this data about it, like the description of it, what it's made out of, what we think it was used for, and then like the mass and the color and the size. Our database has like more than 6,000 pieces of trash in it, and we're like halfway through, so we're gonna have more than 10,000, I think, like data items.
What are you gonna do with it afterwards?
Well, so like some of the trash we just throw away.
Okay.
Like, after we've collected the data, we're saving balls here so that we can hopefully like give them to an animal shelter or something for the dogs to play with.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Like some of it just gets thrown away if it's like plastic bags and stuff. Like they're dirty, they're not going to be recycled. Like they're very likely not going to be recycled. And then we've got we're saving all of the like glass and ceramic and mirror to hopefully collaborate with like a student or students in the art department to do like to make some art.
Yeah.
So
the Sustainability Council is a group of faculty, staff, and students that work on a range of issues on campus about sustainability, but one of them is the Zero Waste Committee. So we try to figure out ways that we can lessen waste on campus, but also make it easier to make choices like recycling. And so our recycling on campus can take any type of plastic, and plastic, paper, glass.
Everyone always says reduce, reuse, recycle. That is good, and especially in that order. You want to be reducing as much as possible, producing as little waste as possible. Recycling, for instance, comes at the end of that, because even though recycling is definitely better than throwing away your plastic trash, the process to recycle a lot of materials also negatively affects the environment a lot of times, so it's kind of just choosing the lesser of two evils.
There's the saying that says there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, and I think this is something that falls under that problem. Like so many of the choices available to us are things that are going to be wrapped in plastic, and like especially if you're a person that is trying to buy like organic vegetables, you're in this kind of catch-22 of like, which is more important to me? We can only make as good of choices as the options that are available to us, and I think it's really easy for people to beat themselves up if they take a plastic bag sometimes at the supermarket, but I think recognizing that we're doing our best and being conscious while working within an imperfect system is really important.
Fortunately, the local community is making efforts to combat excessive plastic waste. I mean, for instance, here in Ocean City, New Jersey, there was a plastic bag ban that was implemented back in 2022. In Long Beach Township, an organization called Alliance for a Living Ocean hosts beach cleanups, has a pledge for people to avoid buying balloons, and offers a take-a-toy, leave-a-toy service for reusing plastic beach toys. In Stone Harbor, the Wetlands Institute has been providing educational tours and events for the public in regards to wetland and coastal ecosystem preservation. There are many other organizations just here in New Jersey that are dedicated to preserving these ecosystems and just the general health of the ocean, and that's a really special thing because, yes, we're not saving the planet or cleaning up coastal plastic pollution where it is the worst, but I think if everyone everywhere just focused all of their efforts on their local community, then it would be a lot more effective than all of us exacerbating our efforts by reaching arms across the planet. And yes, we should care about those communities that are far away that we are affecting, because yes, we are affecting them, so we should acknowledge that. However, when it comes to trying to change either like public policy or our consumption or cleanups and stuff like that, I think it's important to really focus on where you are.
My proposal for individuals is to make 2 lifestyle changes. 1, stop buying one-use plastic items. If we have to because there are no other options, then dispose of them correctly, like recycling, but do not use recycling as an excuse to continue overconsumption. The fact alone that we are often given no alternatives to plastic products should be concern enough that we have moved in a terrible direction and we need to start pulling back.
The plastic on Earth is not going into outer space. It's not going out that way. It's coming in this way, into our bodies and our tissues. Even plastics are going into plants, like fruits and vegetables. We take them up through everything. So no diet we take up here on Earth is going to make a difference. I mean, if you look at the water cycle you learned in elementary school, if the ocean gets sick, the whole world is going to feel the symptoms. I don't know the statistic, but it's like 75% of our body is made of water. So, I mean, if plastic can travel that easily through water, it can travel that easily through our bodies. Plastic is leaching from mothers' placentas into their unborn children. Never before has there been a generation of babies being born with a man-made substance in their organs. And that's really scary. We don't know the effects of that. And at this point, all we can do is just wait and see what happens to them.
2, fight against fast fashion urges. Low prices and volatile trends make buying new clothes and discarding old ones so tempting, but this has led to the fashion industry becoming one of the world's most wasteful industries. The tide of secondhand clothes keeps growing, even as the markets to reuse them are disappearing. Already the textile industry accounts for more greenhouse gas emissions than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. That's a lot of emissions. Think of all the boats and the planes. If you just stop using so many clothes, I mean, to feel better about excessive consumption, people resort to similar systems as recycling, which is clothing donations. However, what many people don't know is that only about 20% of those donated clothes are actually sold in the charity they're given to. The other 80%? It's usually sent to textile recyclers who decide to give them to developing countries, usually in East Africa, over there, or places where they use it to make rags and insulation. So all these options are less than ideal, but it's better than clothes ending up in landfills where they'll break down and pollute the environment with chemicals like lead and flame retardants, carcinogens, and microfibers, which are plastics. The easiest way to stop clothing waste is to stop buying so many clothes. And I realize this may be easier said than done, especially seeing as many manufacturers are specifically designing products to break. But you can start by doing your research and finding quality brands. This will also elongate the clothes purchasing process, leaving you with more time to think whether you actually need something, and fighting back that idea of clothes purchasing being a quick and easy thing. You shouldn't have to make your underwear by hand, but you should appreciate the efforts that go into what you buy and just slow down in general. It should be like getting a tattoo. Sit on it for a while instead of buying on impulse in rapid succession. This will help us, in turn, weed out our needs from our wants.
For 7, almost 8 years. I mean, I haven't grown in 7 to 8 years. And they are very ratty. They're just my work shoes now. Even if something is old, it doesn't have to be clothes necessarily, but find a different way to use them. I use them for work. I don't like throwing anything in. I don't use any of these anymore.
However, at the same time, if viewed from a less ethical and more economic standpoint, the world does revolve around us, and it's surprising that while we are consumed with this sense of self-importance, we also feel ineffectual. But there is power in being a consumer. No man is an island unto himself, and not one person exists in a society, especially not one like the US, who isn't a consumer. So really, the world isn't run by machines in suits, but rather by consumers just like us. So if everyone stops thinking they don't have power because, well, my neighbor isn't recycling, so it's not going to make a difference whether I recycle this bottle or choose not to buy that plastic wrapped fruit, then society is stuck in this paralysis. However, we do have power as consumers because of the sheer number of us, and that is what our economy, and really our government and law, is based on. And so, as Maria Mai says, Politicians are unwilling to introduce unpopular measures unless they are convinced that people will accept them. Therefore, a consumer liberation movement must start from consumers themselves. Only when such a movement becomes strong and widespread will the politicians and entrepreneurs follow them. When cancer starts, you can't stop it. But we're not cancerous. We have the capacity to realize what we're doing is bad and the freedom to change. If we realize we're making tumors, then we can stop before we kill the body that hosts us. However, for this movement to happen, it has to start with the little changes. And these little changes must be motivated by a redefining of our wants versus our needs. Basically, we have to ask ourselves, what would my perfect life look like? And does saving the time or money to buy this plastic thing really fit into that picture? My perfect life looks like lying on the beach at 7 in the morning. But I asked some other people what they thought.
I'm in the process of moving right now, and last night I was like sitting around like all my stuff, and I got really upset because I was like, I have all this stuff that I'm not bringing because I don't need it, but it's just like sitting in my mom's house. So I think, it's easy to think that it makes your life better because it's kind of like what you're being sold, and I think we all fall into it. Like I do it all the time, so I'm not saying I'm better than anyone else for like realizing it, because I feel like I recognize that having more things doesn't make you happier, and then I like go buy more things. So it's really complicated. That's kind of part of this idea too, that the good life is to have things, and then a lot of things are plastic and they break, so then it's just a cycle that never stops.
My dad passed down a phrase to me where he was saying that there's 3 things that you need to be happy in life. Where there's people to love, something to look forward to, and meaningful work. Having a good support system to be around and share memories with, that kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
And animals.
Of course.
Yeah.
Really beautiful like places in the environment and protected areas, and less kind of focus on this like go behavior, and kind of this pulling back of like, okay, what is actually really important?
Do you think it's possible to live in a world with no plastic?
Yeah.
What would that look like?
I do think that we can live in a world without so much plastic. Plastic was only introduced to the market in like the 50s. Before that, there was not a need for it. Granted, like a lot of technology has evolved and used plastic in those technologies, like you said, for medical things. So I think there are certain things that are less, like, don't need to change because it's improved our quality of life. But there are like a ton of plastic use and consumption that is like super unnecessary.
I think it's possible for us to do that. I think we have to recognize that, you know, there are things that will be less convenient in that. If we think about returnable glass bottles, the way that beverages used to come to us, those are heavier. In the system that we're currently working in, they're going to use more fossil fuels to transport them around, and then we have to transport the empty bottles around. And so all of these things, I think, are trade-offs, and I think we, you know, there's, like, and you kind of mentioned, like, we're never going to be 100% rid of single-use plastic, probably, because there are, you know, medical uses that we have saved a lot of lives because of that and stuff. So I think it's really recognizing where we can do better, finding the low-hanging fruit in terms of like, we can, you know, we've shown time and time again that people can do just fine without plastic bags.
I know this seems anal, but it makes me feel better.
I cannot speak for the people of the Philippines who have to wade through our washed-up plastic containers, and I can't speak for fishermen whose livelihoods are at stake. Nor can I speak for the workers in places like Bangladesh and India who breathe in the toxins that our clothes produce in manufacturing. But I can speak for people in my local community, people like me, who suffer like me, who live where I live. We might not be bogged down by waves of litter on our shores, but we can't escape the microplastics. And yet fear for self-preservation shouldn't be the only reason to enact these changes. Fear is a good tool for urgency, but two things unique to humans are our ability to be evil and our ability to be empathetic. Almost every evil executed by a rational mind is motivated by money, which is synonymous with power. But if we remove money from the equation, which is impossible, but let's imagine, we'll find what really makes us happy. We'll find that these changes I've proposed, such as eliminating single-use plastics and fighting our fast fashion urges, aren't really sacrifices at all, but they will help us fulfill our unique human ability to be empathetic, to not want to conquer something or someone, but to realize the intrinsic value in everything and learn how to relate to it in a non-hierarchical way. A lot of Indigenous people live like this, and Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer spoke about it in their book, Braiding Sweetgrass. They said, quote, "Science and traditional knowledge may ask different questions and speak different languages, but they may converge when both truly listen to the plants." This language barrier between traditional knowledge and our modern way of viewing the world, often a patriarchal way of viewing the world, is what has to break down. And we can do that by developing a general appreciation, not just for the ocean, not just for a plant in the garden, and not just for a bug, but for the interconnectedness of every living thing here on the surface. And yes, I include the ocean in that classification of every living thing, because the earth itself is an organism. Everything on it interacts like an organism would, and the ocean certainly is, just as alive and vibrant as any other living thing. It gives so much life, it literally gives breath, both in the form of water and oxygen to every organism and creature on the planet Earth. So, when we understand this, we have to understand that we are not, and we cannot be separate from that.
Another uplifting quote by Maria Mize. It has been found that in the USA today, the quality of life is lower than it was 10 years ago. There seems to be an inverse relationship between GDP and happiness.
But all of this doesn't go to say the world is doom and gloom. That's not what I'm trying to say. If anything, I'm trying to show that these are things that you can, even though the world is a bad place and we do bad things, we still deserve to be happy. And these are things you can be silly about. And I think when we talk about climate change a lot, people tend to yeah, it's taken seriously because it's a really serious issue, and I'm by no means trying to make it less of an issue. But it's also okay to laugh, because these aren't things that can be fixed in through one person. So I think it's important that we remember the human story is one of perseverance and the pursuit of beauty and failed triumphs. We do deserve to be happy, no matter how irritating or stupid we can be. We deserve it just as much much as any dog or caterpillar or hippopotamus. I'm not going to be like poison ivy and be like death to humans for the sake of the ocean. That's not what I'm trying to say. And I'm not trying to say that anyone who buys a plastic water bottle or goes on a cruise is evil. I just think somewhere along the way, we got the wrong idea about how to really become happy and what it means to cultivate a good life for ourselves. So I just think that making these changes, like reducing plastic consumption and fast fashion habits, is not just good for the planet, but I think it can actually genuinely help us improve our lives and help us be happier. I think we should live in the moment and just stop consuming so much. Period.
Worrying about global warming does give us a lot of stress, and we need to stress about it to make a difference, but honestly, we should still find the time to be happy because that's why we're trying to make the world a better place. So our pursuit of happiness shouldn't be at the expense of others. Joy is such a simple human necessity that requires so little to fulfill, but here we are trying to sell the world for it. I think a lot of people have this misconception of climate activists that they're stressed out, hateful, anti-humans. However, I'm not doing this to satisfy any hateful self-interest. Like many climate activists, I'm doing this because I want to ensure the world is such a place that all types of people and animals, future generations included, have the equal opportunity to cultivate happiness. I want the planet to be healthy so we can be happy. It's such a cheap thing now, happiness. I'd hate to imagine a world where joy does become something rare and expensive. I mean, wouldn't that be a pretty awful place?
This fish actually that I just recently learned is that it's so big that predators like sharks and stuff will take bites out of it, and I mean obviously it feels the pain, I mean we would assume, but it goes on like swimming around and then it just regenerates so quickly that that the fish just keep coming back and eating it. Imagine swimming around and things just keep taking bites out of you and you keep regenerating and it just keeps happening again and again. Poor parrotfish.
If you have like a math class, a calculator is going to be more important than a paintbrush, but that's not going to apply if you're going to an art class.
People always say like, oh, we're the problem. Like if we go extinct, I'll be glad because we're the problem and the earth will keep going. But at the same time, I don't think that means that we're like inherently evil or that we're bad for the earth. The way of thinking or the cultural norms that are maybe the bad things, but it doesn't make us inherently bad.
As an ecologist, like I bristle at kind of like the normative framing, I think there, and I'm just like, well, humans are, right? We're part of the ecosystem. You know, good or bad for the ecosystem is really from whose point of view, I think, right?
I think you could make an argument for like anything, because you could say like, oh, bees are more important because without bees we wouldn't have flowers being pollinated, and then we wouldn't have insects living, we wouldn't have things for like life, or all insects are probably actually more important than us because of the way the food chain works. So I think because you could make an argument for anything being more important, I think that's why it's kind of like we're all important in our own ways.
I think in terms of like our lived reality where humans exist and we are on this earth, we have this idea that like we're really important and that like we know the best, and everything should be tailored to our needs. And I think that's a really flawed way of thinking. The Earth existed long before there were humans. It's just so incredible, our Earth. And so I don't think we're that important in like the grand scheme of things. If we're thinking about like really zoomed out, like time and space and universe type stuff.